So I think we can get started.
Yeah, let's kick this off. Welcome, everybody. So my name is Lisa Kivers, and I am quickly kicking things off on behalf of the Conservation Connection Program, and apparently having an issue with my rural internet. So I'm even turning my video off, but hopefully folks can hear okay. Please put into the chat at any time if there's any tech issues, and a big gratitude shout out to Kirsten and Jurcek for manning the wheels here. All right, we'll go through these ones here quick, Kirsten, and then take over the show. All right, so again, welcome everybody, thank you. And one logistic thing that you'll see in the next, please put in the chat if folks are having any issues seeing things. Are you on the next slide there, Kirsten? So one thing we did today, a little different, is this is technically a Zoom meeting versus a Zoom webinar. So you see everybody there, but the reason we did that is so that folks can more readily ask questions via voice and unmute yourself. So if you keep yourself muted, you can feel free to turn your video off during the session. Two things, in the middle of the screen, you'll see a line that divides the screen from all those boxes. You can move that however you like to make the screen and the slides bigger. And then you see here in the speaker and gallery view, if you click that little 9-dot box up in the right corner under view, you can select speaker view, and that way the person who is talking is the only person you see, and then you won't have to see all these boxes as well. So it's a little different, but this way again we can hopefully help folks easier with questions. All right, next. What we'll be doing today is, I'll talk super quick about this Conservation Connection Program. Kirsten will be giving some introductions and talking through what we'll be going through for the rest of our session for grazers on CSP. And we have some great farmers here who are generously giving their time to share their stories with NRCS and CSP. And we'll wrap up at 12:30, but we're happy to stay later if there's questions or anything else folks need. Thanks again for coming. Now, this is part of the Conservation Connection Program. Next, that is a new program. It's a partnership of NRCS with Renewing the Countryside and Sustainable Farming Association in Minnesota, where we're doing specific outreach to underserved audiences on NRCS programs, including beginning farmers. We have a team of connectors in Wisconsin, Kirsten and Robert Pearson, Madison, Marion Holm up in Dunn County. These are folks, I'll put the links in the follow-up email. If you know of anybody who could use some more one-on-one connections with outreach on NRCS programs, we are happy to do that. Next. And another program that just launched last week with NRCS, this one, Michael Fields is the lead, is Wisconsin Women in Conservation. We are doing networking between women throughout the state, women landowners on conservation and NRCS programs. So that's the website. I'll have that in the follow-up. If you're a woman landowner, please sign up there, join in. This is a kickoff to a 3-year initiative to really organize for the first time women landowners in Wisconsin. Next. And again, thank you to NRCS for their support in these programs, their support in this outreach. You know, folks here are very familiar with NRCS, but it is our technical agency of USDA, and all the things we're talking about are voluntary technical financial assistance to help us be better stewards of the land. Next. And with the mission of healthy soil, healthy water, all those things that we deem important, and particularly in grazing work, have some resources and things to tap into, and definitely the expertise of other grazers and farmers in Wisconsin. All right, Kirsten, take it away.
Kirsten, you are muted.
Thank you. Yes, so I'm Kirsten Jurcek. I'm a conservation connector with Renewing the Countryside and a grazing planner for Glacierland RC&D. So I work in Southeast Wisconsin, and I also have a grass-based 300-acre grass-based farm in Southeast Wisconsin where we do 100% grass-fed finished beef. So I myself am enrolled in the CSP program, NRCS's CSP program, and I think it's a fantastic program. So I just wanted to share more, wanted more people to learn about the program. And so we invited Meridith Williams from NRCS. She's our state CSP specialist. We invited Adam Abel from NRCS. He's one of our acting grazing specialists for the state. We invited Altfrid Krusenbaum from DGA to invite his other DGA members, and I'm going to turn it over to him in just a second. And then we're going to wrap it up with a farmer panelist with Rick from Northeast Wisconsin, Rachel from Central Wisconsin, Jim from Western Wisconsin, and myself from Southeast Wisconsin will share our experiences with the CSP program. So I want to thank everybody for coming, and I'd like to turn it over to Altfrid Krusenbaum to say a few words about DGA.
Yeah, thank you, Kirsten. My name is Altfrid Krusenbaum. I'm an education coordinator for Dairy Grazing Apprenticeship, or DGA in short, in Wisconsin. And we are an organization, a program that started originally in 2010 in Wisconsin, but in 2015 we became a federally registered apprenticeship. And as such, we expanded into 13 states. We have 180 training farms across these states. And currently 43 apprentices enrolled in the program and 39 journey graziers that are out in the world and hopefully doing great things and continuing dairy grazing. I thought this program might be of interest to many of our grazing dairy farms. It's a natural fit. I myself was a dairy grazier for 30 years, enrolled in the program in 2012. And I can talk a little bit about my experiences later on. Thank you, Kirsten.
Thank you. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Meridith Williams from our NRCS state office. And I'd like Meridith is going to share the basics of the CSP program with us.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming today and joining in on this talk. This is going to be kind of just a brief overview of the program. If anyone does have further questions afterwards, feel free to reach out to myself. I'm also going to provide in this presentation information to how to find your local contact, your local points of contact, which are so important out in our field offices across the state. And they really are the ones who are helping you do the planning on your operation, and along with applying for NRCS technical assistance or programs. Want to go to the next slide, Kirsten? We'll keep forward.
Is that where we're going to be, Meridith?
Yep, that works. So just kind of an overview of CSP. The program really rewards for existing conservation on an operation, and it requires additionality of conservation activities to be adopted. So really the big takeaway here is it's rewarding you for existing conservation already on your operation. The land uses that can be included in a CSP application contract: cropland, pasture, farmstead, and our forestry land. Also, there is a catch-all category called associated ag land, and that's something, it's really tied to the other ones, and that's why it's not listed here. But these are 5-year contracts with payments for, once again, that benchmark condition, and then also additional payments for activities that are being contracted through the program. Within state, in 2020, we had 541 contracts covering about 238,000 acres enrolled. So it just kind of shows the size of the program already. Currently, we are working on renewing some contracts and working on a sign up for new contracts as well. So we'll get into that a little bit too. Next slide. So CSP is really a program that builds upon conservation practices available through our other program, our other major program, I should say, in NRCS, which is the Environmental Quality Incentive Program. CSP offers practices enhancements and bundles of enhancements. So an example of that would be maybe some of you who have been through EQIP are familiar with the practice forage and biomass planting, which is our standard 512. CSP offers an enhancement onto that practice of this E512B, which is forage plantings that help increase organic matter and depletion. So it's going above and beyond that standard. CSP also allows bundles, and the bundles are really multiple enhancements that complement each other, rolled up, bundled into that one group. In CSP, the entire operation, everything within the control of the participant is included. And that's really a conversation that happens with our service center, our local service centers who you'd be working with to apply in the application process. Next slide. So where and when to apply? Where you need to find your local service center. If you have a hard time finding your local service center, I will provide my email address in this presentation. Shoot me an email, let me know what county you're located in, and I will work on getting you in touch with who you need to be in touch with. When to apply? Now is the time to apply. NRCS accepts all of our programmatic applications on a continuous basis, but we do evaluate them in application batching periods, we call them. The next application batching period here in Wisconsin is 2021 CSP Classic applications, and that would be anyone looking to enroll as a new participant, and the deadline is March 26th of 2021. So what I will say is, if you're at all interested in the program, it never hurts to put an application in with your local service center. Next slide, please. So just to kind of give an overview of how you find your local service center, you're going to want to go to our Wisconsin NRCS homepage. The link is here at the top. In that picture above with the yellow circle, you go to the Contact Us and then go to Local Service Centers. When you do that, this next picture kind of on the bottom right is going to show up. There's different ways you can find your local service center. On here, it's not quite showing up on my slide, but under the national NRCS directories, there is an option there to find your local service center. And there it goes. And it's showing, if you go in there, you'll enter your state and your county. It's going to show your service center not only for NRCS, but also FSA, which usually we're in the same location, as well as farm loan. So it'll give you all that information on one screen. Next slide, please. Eligibility for CSP. So CSP has kind of a three-tier eligibility. There's participant eligibility, which is the deed or lease, through FSA to get on your farm records report, your producer farm record report. There's the track and farm eligibility, which is that you've worked with FSA and they have assigned a farm and track number to your operation. There's adjusted gross income, and that is a form that's once again filed with FSA. It's a form saying you don't earn over a certain limit amount of money, because we do have limits in place for what you can earn for USDA programs. The last one under participant eligibility is highly erodible land and wetland compliant. So this is, once again, it's an FSA and NRCS compliance that you do have a plan in place on your highly erodible lands, and that you have not converted any wetlands or are out of compliance for any of those reasons. The next one's really land eligibility. This is something that'll be looked at by that field office. There are certain requirements for the land having been in production for 4 out of the last 6 years prior to the Farm Bill, and things like that. So the local field office will be looking at your FSA maps with you and determining what land is eligible to be in the program and not. Then we have this stewardship threshold eligibility. Really what that is, it's when you work with the local field office, they're gonna talk to you about your operation, come out and do a site visit on your operation, really assess everything that you're already doing, and talk you through. That assessment process of your operation is really where we look as a field office at the stewardship threshold and determine if you're doing enough to already qualify for the program or not. What I will say with this is that stewardship threshold eligibility, if a participant is not meeting that right now, it doesn't mean that we don't want to work with you. What it means is we maybe want to take a turnaround, go back to a little bit more basic planning and start looking at resource concerns on your operation. Where can we do some planning? Where can we possibly do some cost sharing through our other program, which is the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, and then maybe at a later date wrap back around to applying for CSP again. So I put this out here, it's expectations of the participants. We expect that the participant is going to be a decision maker in the planning process. Planning process is participant driven. Participants must be actively engaged in making decisions on best alternatives and timeline for implementation. So really what this means is we need you to be working with that field staff, engaging in conversation. Communication is key as far as, you know, when you're applying the activities that you want to take on, the activities that are already going on your operation, along with if you are offered a contract, you know, we need you to be sure that you're communicating with that field office about any changes on your operation or any obstacles that maybe come up that isn't allowing you to do something on your contract. These are contracts. Non-compliance can result in termination of contract and a need for a participant to pay funds back. So that sounds scary. I like to say though, communication can avoid a lot of this. So I really do stress communicating with your local staff at the office if you're offered, well, during the application process, but also after the application process when you're offered a contract. Entering a contract requires a time commitment and a financial commitment. So there are some times where you're putting a practice into place. You might have to have a financial commitment up ahead because you're not going to get a payment until, let's say, November of that year. You know, we do payments once a year with the CSP program. So, you know, there is that financial commitment up forth that you would have to be in a position to make. And then as far as a time commitment, you know, we do ask that you communicate with the office different things throughout the year as far as operation, if there's been any changes, if you're able to complete the practices or enhancements on your contract, if you're not able to complete them, different things like that. Once again, the last point here, communication is key, okay? So with that, I don't know if we're doing questions now or at the end here, but I do have my email address up there as well. So like I said before, if you have any trouble getting a hold of your local field office staff, please do reach out to me and we'll get that communication happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Meredith. I think we'll hold questions till the end because Adam might answer some questions that people have. So with this, I'd like to thank Meredith for her presentation and turn it over to Adam Abel. Adam, I'm going to stop screen sharing so you can start.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but I can't see your screen. There we go. You're good.
I'm going to keep my video off just to keep things hopefully a little smoother. First of all, I think that every grazer should be considering CSP. It is a fantastic program. I do want to encourage that everyone who is considering rotational grazing in Wisconsin, at least explore EQIP, Environmental Quality Incentive Program first. There's a lot of things that we can do to put you on the right track or path so that way it's a nice, smooth, and easy transition to CSP. The one thing that I've done with the people I've worked with is I've really encouraged them to think about this as a step process where you go through equip, you develop your grazing plan, probably going to be putting some cropland into rotational grazing and just doing a better job of management than you were before. And that can really pave the path towards a CSP application / contract. And that is a real benefit. It can help you as a farmer as an additional income. But you know, the one thing I want to stress with CSP and equip, the benefits that we're getting and why NRCS is so interested in this are just multifold. The impact that acre of grass has on the environment, from soil erosion, from water quality, from water infiltration. I don't think that anybody who's a grazer should ever underestimate those impacts. Every acre of grass is an impact that's positive in the state. And that's why I love working with people in grazing, because this is really the best practice out there, in my opinion. It hits everything. It hits the environment, it hits the economics, it hits animal health, it hits lifestyle, and it's a ton of fun to do as well. So after saying that, what I did was I took a look at the most common CSP practices that were used in Wisconsin to discuss those. And then I also chose some others that I think might be being underutilized that I think that every grazer should take a look at. And one thing, when we look at the different enhancements that I'm going to be going through, by no means should anyone consider that these are the only enhancements that are out there. These are just common ones. The intention here is to get you thinking about what you could potentially use CSP for on your farm. Actual enhancement selection and working through the planning process would require that field visit with the local staff and the real in-depth planning that you would need so that's successful on your operation. And one other thing, don't get into something because it sounds good. Really understand what the enhancement is asking you to do, so that way you don't commit to doing something that just isn't really in the direction or path that you had intended for your operation. I can't stress that enough. There are enough opportunities out there that we can jump into different enhancements that will work for each individual operation. So the first, I'm going to shift here. The first 5 enhancements that I've put on the screen here to discuss are the most popular in the state of Wisconsin. And I think they really do have a lot of applicability to most operations. The first one would be stockpiling cool season forages to improve structure and composition or plant productivity and health. This is a really great enhancement, especially if you're a beef operation and you can really extend deep into November and December and sometimes further on. And what this requires is just a level of planning with your local office, having enough land to set that aside, but even more importantly, thinking about the long-term strategy to implement. Some grasses stockpile better and some forages maintain quality better than others. So if this is the direction that you want to go through and push your farm towards, it's an opportunity for days on pasture, which is an economic opportunity for you, but also the longer you can keep animals out there, the healthier it's going to be, the easier it's going to be. But think about what that means as far as the species selection, how you want to rotate that. Most of these enhancements, it just require a plan. We need to plan that out a little bit so that way we can ensure that you're going down a path that has a high likelihood of success. Improve grazing management for soil compaction on pasture through monitoring activities. So this is another highly used enhancement in Wisconsin. And you can see in the bottom left there is a water tank. And you can think about this from the water tank standpoint. You could consider this from, the dry lot that you use all the time that has not been rotationally grazed. Those areas are all eligible for this enhancement, and the opportunity to actually get these areas producing through minor management changes are pretty profound. If you start to water in one area all the time, and you start to see huge compaction, you can start to get a lot of loss in those particular paddocks. And if it's 5% of each paddock, that could add up over the course of a grazing season. So, simple management strategies like moving the tank or even just a better rotation can really improve your on-site management and the net result is you win in dry matter production, and we win from the NRCS standpoint because better grass, deeper grass roots, thicker sods, those are really what we're looking for with grazing to promote water quality and soil stabilization. This is another one that I really am a big fan of, and this requires a lot of planning from the get-go. Clipping mature forages to set back vegetative growth for improved forage quality. So one thing that I'm a big fan of in Wisconsin, and we have a lot of opportunity with this because of our dairy backgrounds and predominance in the state, but I really encourage producers to not set their paddocks up in such a way so that way it's only meant for grazing. What I mean is, people think that it's going to be really easy to have 31 1-acre pastures and they're going to be permanent and you'll never move them. If that's what you want to do and that's what's going to work for you, that's fine. Nobody's here to tell you what to do or how to manage your property. But think about the lost flexibility and the lost dry matter opportunity that you're not getting by having the flexibility to manage them in a bigger scheme of clipping them if they're super mature because there's a spring flush, or, you know, even being able to take those cows out onto that hay field because you ran out of forages in your pastures. The one thing that you don't want to do is feed stored feed in the middle of summer if you've got a hay field right across the fence. So think about this on the bigger terms, and that's where equip's fun, and that's why I say a good plan from the get-go through equip. So you set this up so you've got a very highly flexible system, allows you to move into an enhancement like this very easily. This one is one of my favorite, implementing bale or swath grazing to increase organic matter and reduce nutrients in surface water. This particular enhancement, I think everybody should be considering. You know, if you've got beef, if you've got dairy heifers, if you have even dairy cows, although just be cautious with dairy cows, there's more management considerations with them. But in general, the impact that you can have on your farm with implementing something like this from a nutrient management standpoint, where you're moving manure around the farm, from long-term soil health. There might be short-term decreases in soil health with compaction or mud or cow falling, but think about what the long-term impacts of bale grazing or swath grazing are. Most of the beef grazers that I work with, I'm pushing them to at least consider this, because if you think about the time savings, or just not having to go out and start a tractor up when it's January 29th and -20 below, there's some real benefits to that, more than just economic benefits. But even more so, I don't know that I've worked with a producer who's actually done this the way we've asked them to do it, who hasn't been happy with it. And I just got off the phone yesterday with a dairy farmer who had his heifers out there, and he was just stunned with how well they look. Like, he cannot believe how much less manure he has in his manure pit, and the hoof health and just the athleticness of his heifers. He's super, super impressed with. Tie that to, you can take these sites and plant this out, and you move these areas across your farm, you know, every year, every couple of years you move. That allows you to renovate and bring new improved grass species on. But think about the long-term nutrient management of that. If you were to just feed in one spot every year, all the time, what are you losing in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium that you'll never get back because you're piling it in one corner of your operation? Those are really things to consider. And that's what I like about these enhancements, because there is just a real benefit to you as producers to consider adopting some of these. So the last of the 5 that are most used in Wisconsin would be use of body condition scoring for livestock on a monthly basis to keep track of herd health. So this is a useful enhancement. I think it might be useful for beef operations depending on the situation, but where I see the most applicability for this one would be for dairy heifers. And dairy heifers on pasture are just a fantastic opportunity for any operation. A great way to have great animal health, reduce cost, manage manure, and just overall save a bunch of money. That being said, a lot of dairy genetics, you know, they might not thrive as well on pasture as some of the other ones. And each individual herd is going to be different. Each individual animal is going to be different. But the one thing you don't want to do is have your herd go backwards. So just the use of a body condition score to monitor where they're at, that's a good way just to keep track that they're going the direction that you want to do. It's just a visual, it's more than a visual documentation. It's a use of record keeping to show that your herd is not only maintaining, but gaining. And that's where you can get the real benefit out of that. So some of the other things that I'd like more people to consider with enhancements with CSP throughout Wisconsin, the first enhancement that I think should be used more would be improved grazing management for plant productivity and health with monitoring activities. So a lot of people who are entering into CSP are already grazing, and they're doing a pretty good job of it. But the one thing that you really start to see if you start taking forage samples and forage analysis and really even just doing a little monitoring for yourself, you really start to see the benefit of residual on pastures. If you look at our standards, for a lot of reasons, we've got 3 to 4 inches of residual is what we're looking for to meet our equip standards. Now, if you would take this enhancement and part of the plan is to go from 3 to 4 inches to 5 to 6 or 6 to 7, the opportunity for increased dry matter production across your entire farm over the course of a season, and then compound that by multiple years, it just gets exponentially better. I cannot stress the importance of residual with rotational grazing. I've seen through time and time again, I've done thousands of clippings, and you can just prove it to yourself. And these are easy things to do to show yourself. The great thing about having cows on pasture is, you know, it doesn't cost much to run them out there. So if you're running equipment across a piece of land, you know, everyone wants to take it short, less than 3 inches, because it's so expensive to run that equipment over there. But if you're running cattle out there, it doesn't matter. You can run them across there 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times a year. It doesn't matter. So if you can leave that grass blade there, you can leave more leaf there for photosynthesis, and you can leave that residual there, which is what you can use this enhancement for, you will gain exponentially in dry matter production across your operation. Now, it's more complicated than that. You gotta do good soil management, nutrient management. You need to understand the management with it. But if you can get that concept and understand what that means for you, dry matter equals money for every operation. And more importantly to that, it equals infiltration, water quality benefits, and reduced soil loss, which are all the things that we're trying to accomplish as an agency with the NRCS. The other thing, excuse me, that I think we could really start to look at as far as other enhancements in the state that would be applicable on a lot of different sites are grazing management that protects sensitive areas, surface or groundwater from nutrients. So we have a very diverse landscape in Wisconsin. We have a lot of areas that have shallow to bedrock. We have a lot of areas that are very permeable with shallow groundwater. So the opportunity for nutrients to go quickly down into our groundwater, those are real concerns. And with grazing, we can actually identify those sites with our soils maps, and we can develop a plan that would allow for a little bit different management on those sites, maybe grazing it a little less, or maybe calling those areas out if they're part of a bigger pasture unit and managing them and only having the cows out there when it's appropriate. And that's something that I think that we should be considering more with the CSP program. This is an opportunity for better environmental practice, better grazing management, and it's something that I see a lot of these inclusions on within these bigger pasture units that we could really utilize this enhancement. So please consider this one if you are looking at some of these practices for CSP. And then one of my favorites, prescribed grazing on pasture land that improves riparian and watersheds function. So this is an actual site that I've worked on. And 3 years ago, this site had gully. I should mention that every single picture on here is from a different grazing operation that I've been able to work with. It's a ton of fun. I love my job. I love working with grazers, and it's very rewarding. very fortunate for the opportunities that I've had with the NRCS. But that being said, this right here is a particular site that I worked on that was problematic. By no means in this picture would I say that this is 100% done, but this is 3 years in, and 3 years ago we had gullies, erosion, massive soil loss. You can't see it here, and I should have found a different picture, but there's actually a stream that's running through that grass corridor. 3 years ago, that was an actively eroding stream bank that was feeding into one of the highest sediment contributing streams or rivers to the Green Bay area. This particular gully contributed a lot of sediment to Green Bay. And why that's important is phosphorus rolls off with a lot of sediment, and phosphorus is one of the big reasons we have algae blooms in Green Bay. So by stabilizing this site in grass, not only did this producer have the opportunity to get more pasture, more high quality pasture, but think about the long-term environmental impacts on this particular site. Like I said, this picture isn't super pretty, but it really can show what you can do quite quickly with just good management. And what we did on this site was we ran just shy of 100 heifers through here for 3 12-hour periods. So it was only grazed 3, maybe it was grazed 4 times, but I think it was only grazed 3 times this last year, but it was super intense for 12 hours, and we moved through it. And the one thing you need to understand with this particular enhancement, you cannot go into these areas when you're leaving an imprint. Like, you need to use common sense with this. And that's what we would need to define in the plan moving forward with CSP. And then I believe this is the last one, grazing management that protects sensitive areas from gully erosion. So this is also on that same site, but in a different area. And this has since been healed. And all we did was we changed the management in that particular pasture. This was an overgrazed area that hadn't had any grazing management on it. We did a little bit of work to stabilize the gully just so it could heal a little bit. But the main change was we put in a management plan. And this is, I see a lot of these small gullies that feed into creeks, and all of that adds up. So these are other practices or enhancements that I think we should consider with CSP. So that's the end of my slideshow. I went through the main ones that I think that are being used, first of all, and secondly, the ones that I also think we should be considering. It's much more, we have many more enhancements than what I showed. I just tried to hit a highlight to give you a little bit of an idea of what you can do with CSP. But that being said, there is so much opportunity with this program, and I would really encourage every grazer to consider it. That being said, when you're doing your EQIP plan and planning through this, consider what you're going to do with EQIP in the next 2 to 3 years, and then what is the long-term plan, because you can kind of plan that out from the beginning, and it makes these transitions significantly easier. That's all I have.
Thank you, Adam. So at this point, I think we'll go into our farmer share. So I am Kirsten Jurcek from Brattset Family Farm in Jefferson, Wisconsin, so Southeast Wisconsin. We enrolled in CSP. We were actually approached by our local field office to see if we'd be willing to enroll in CSP. I think they were just kind of getting their feet wet on it and wanted an experiment farm, so we were happy to be that farm. So we enrolled in 2017. So our CSP is a little bit older and from the old Farm Bill. So I didn't actually do any of the practices that Adam just described. But what we did do was some upland wildlife habitat. So basically we put in 4 bat houses. They were on different parts of the farm, and they were all within close proximity to some of our farm ponds. So we did that, and then we also did a different management in our hay fields. So instead of opening a field from the outside and working your way in, running all the wildlife into the center of the field to then, take out with the hay vine, we opened our fields from the center and work our way out. So we didn't have to do a lot of changes. I feel like the CSP program really helps me be a better conservation farmer. There's things I do sometimes on my farm for wildlife habitat. So for grassland birds, sometimes I'll leave a few acres in the center of different paddocks for the grassland birds. And, some years when hay is expensive, you think, boy, this is financially maybe not the right thing to do, but for the wildlife it is. But then thinking about that CSP payment you're getting, really justifies it in my mind, and not only in my mind, but to my business partners. So for us, CSP has been an amazing program. We are in the process, we will be re-enrolling for another 5 years when that time comes this summer. So that's been my experience. I just really think that CSP, we first use EQIP to get our farm to that conservation standard we need to be at. And then the CSP program really pays us for being the stewards of the land that we are, and, helps us just take our stewardship to the next level. And I just think it's a fantastic program. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Rachel Bouressa from Bouressa Family Farm in central Wisconsin.
Hi, thank you very much, Kirsten, and thank you guys for coordinating this informational webinar. So I enrolled in CSP in 2018. I kind of had pushed my NRCS office staff. I wanted to plant trees. I just really wanted to find a program that would help me to plant trees down a center fence line that it was one area I didn't have shade on my farm. But I guess with the CSP program and Adam's examples, a lot of it are kind of these enhanced practices that as you get to grazing more, a lot of these practices do benefit your bottom line and your productivity in more ways than just the cost share on the program and cost share to implement some of these practices. One of my mantras that kind of correlates with the CSP program is this idea that biology brings biology. So a lot of my grazing management, while they're listed in the enhancements that I posted, aren't exactly ones that are in my plan, but extended rotations, leaving buffer strips, a lot of these things that are going to enhance wildlife habitat in addition to improving my forage and soil and water. So yeah, my practices were to do the tree planting out in the pasture, as well as for the homestead, I did some planting of berries and shrubs for wildlife food. And then the improved grazing management enhancement. But yeah, I think every grazer, this is just another tool in the toolbox for us to use. And a lot of it is based on practices that we're already implementing. So yeah, encourage everyone to apply, and I will hand it over to Rick to talk about what he does.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to participate, and appreciate the opportunity to share what we did. So probably about 10 years ago, we explored the CSP program. We were encouraged to look at it, and we felt like it didn't work for us. The enhancements, and then it was also competitive. We did not rank very high in the state, so therefore we were not either the payment level or nor the opportunity to participate was very good. So we have taken our time and explored it again, and we signed in 2019. And what Adam said and what Meridith said are really absolutely true. And that quote about any managed grazing operation should be exploring CSP, because we had a really favorable experience working with NRCS representative. We are in Shawano County, and the office was very instrumental in helping us. Sherry Zank-Reed was the official at the NRCS office in Shawano that helped us. And then we also had technical assistance contracted through Julie Peterson, who works for Pheasants Forever, but contracts with NRCS for those technical services. And those two individuals were remarkable in getting us on board. My wife, Valerie Dantoin, did a lot of the technical details. So on our conservation plan, our CSP plan, we have 20 different components, but essentially about 7 or 8 different parts. We did, of course, the lion's share is the pasture. 195 acres of our 240-acre farmstead our payments for the pasture managed grazing practice. And as the contract is written, it's maintaining and supporting the practice level as we are practicing it now. The next largest acreage is associated ag land and farmstead. The farmsteads, of course, are the land around the buildings, and the associated ag land for us, a lot of that is, since we are certified organic, we have some buffer strips between us and some adjacent farms. And so some of those were a part of the associated ag land. We did some pollinator plantings. We established a wildlife corridor to enhance access to water for wildlife. We did some pollinator conservation cover. We increased a riparian forest buffer width to enhance wildlife habitat. And we established conservation cover, establishing native tree and shrub species to restore native plant communities. Those last 5 different items that I mentioned incorporated a total of about 4 acres. And our program payments through the years have been, for the 5-year contract, will be approximately $50,000. So the vast majority of that is from the grazing land, and then all the other programs that we did, and we fully intend to proceed with renewing our contract in 2023, doing more enhancements. And I think this is a good example of what I believe recognizes that which we've done. Those of us who are doing managed grazing, Adam said it so well. If you're doing managed grazing, you've got your land covered with grass. You're doing a very good job of protecting the soil and protecting the groundwater and the resources that we're trying to preserve. You should be recognized for that. We should not, the farmers themselves should not be the only ones responsible for that. So this is a sharing of the responsibility for conservation. And we are stewards of the land, and it's an appropriately named title. So it's been a very favorable experience, as you can tell, and I was fortunate to be able to participate and share my our experience with it so far. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rick. And now we're going to go to Jim Munsch, and I'm going to try to go back to his slide. There we go. There we go. Here's Jim.
Okay. Anyway, we live over in Vernon County, and our land is all highly erodible land, and what the soil classification goes to C and D slopes, some E slopes. In layman's talk, that means we've got land that's 15 to 20% slope. So when we bought this farm in '76 and rented a farm next door to us in about '80, we were having a lot of erosion problems, and we weren't making any money. And so we decided to switch from what we were doing to managed grazing just at the time that Vance Haugen, that's Bonnie's on this call, Bonnie's husband Vance, was promoting grazing amongst the dairy farmers in Southwest Wisconsin. So we got on that train with them back. We started managed grazing in late 80s. In 1991, we had no crops after 91 except hay. And we did it for 2 reasons. One was to save soil, and it's done a remarkable job of that. And the second was to begin making money, because this is the cheapest forage you can get into an animal right here in front of you, especially beef cows. Beef cows can make good use of what you see there. Incidentally, our grass is really greener than that. The guy that took this was from Hay and Forage. He should have known better. The color isn't what I'd like to see it, but that's they write better articles than they take pictures. Anyway, CSP came along around 2010 or something like that, and Sam Skemp over at the NRCS office approached me and said, "You want to get in this thing?" And I said, "What do I have to do?" And I've worked with Sam for 20 years, something like that. Come to find out, we had done all the practices that Adam spelled out. We had water lines, we moved tanks, we had high resist, everything that Adam spelled out. At that time, CSP only paid you for new stuff you would do. So we ended up doing some ridiculous stuff. We put in pollinator in a place which was really steep on some rented land. And what else we do? Collect oil from crankcases and recycle it. And I think we got, I don't know, $6 or $7 an acre on a CSP, which is just barely better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick. So 2000, let's see, 5 years go by, 2015, we signed up again. The same situation existed. We were doing all this stuff. And at that time, they didn't pay you for stuff that you'd already done. And so they wanted us to do more. And I was about not to get into it. But I was kind of interested in birds. And so we did some bird enhancements. We got into it and we made it about on all the land rented. And at that time, we rented a couple of other farms. So it was, you know, a little bit better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick. But when I went to recycle this time, I was blown away. And all of you are going to be blown away. If you've done a bunch of these things, they count that. It's something new in the farm bill, or somebody dreamt it up, but it's a good dream up because it pays you for what you're doing. Now, I would do it anyways because it saves money and saves soil, but it's nice to get paid. And then putting it in perspective, we went from $10 an acre to $78 an acre on this new contract. I rent land in competition with grain farmers. They're paying someplace out our way between $150 and $200 an acre. By getting $78 an acre on this program, it levels the playing field. Now, that's funny out here because there are no level fields, but it makes me competitive to rent land because and how much forage I can get off by rotational grazing. This is a dollars and cents winning proposition. But I am, from the time I was a kid in Indiana until now, I've been a soil conservationist. And that's the part that makes you really feel good about this. And because we're grass fed, the farm we rent has no row crops on it. We just cycle right back into hay when we renovate, and we don't plow anymore. We direct seed. So we're saving a lot of soil, making some money, and the government comes along and helps me be competitive on renting land. It's a win, win, win.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, it does. So at this point, we'll take questions. Just tell us who you'd like the question to be for, Meridith, Adam, or any of the presenters. One question I'm going to start out with is probably to Meridith. Meridith, do grazers need to have a grazing plan in place on their farm to be eligible for CSP? If they're looking at grazing land, if they're looking at forestry, do they have to have a forestry plan in place on their farm? And then adding to that question, what do you consider to be an update plan? So if someone has a plan that's 5 years old and they're still doing approximately the same thing, what will that look like?
So to apply for the program, a grazing plan is not required. However, because of the workload that this program gives us here in the state of Wisconsin, we do have a workload prioritization tool in place. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to prioritize folks that do have a grazing plan above those who don't. And the need for that really is because we have such a workload in the state. We have to, you know, put our staff working on the applications that are of the highest caliber of conservation. And it's the same with the forestry end of things. You know, we have that workload prioritization tool to make sure that we're working with kind of the cream that rises to the top. So it's not required, however, it does help. With that being said, that's where the opportunity, I think myself and Adam both alluded to it, is, you know, if you don't have that plan, it's okay. It's time to circle around to the EQIP program that offers those plans being written, or just to get in touch with your local point of contacts and talk to them about what a plan would look like, if they have the ability to write it, or maybe they can get you in touch with someone who can help write that. That plan really does help set you up to be the most successful.
Thank you, Meredith. And so one thing I want to throw out there is, so Rachel Bouressa is on the call. She's a NRCS TSP technical service provider, so she can write grazing plans. I'm also a TSP and can write grazing plans. Rachel works in central Wisconsin, but can actually work anywhere in the state. There's several of us that have funding sources to expedite getting grazing plans done in the state. I personally work in Waukesha, Jefferson, and Rock counties, and can extend my area into the rest of southeast Wisconsin. River Country RC&D in the western part of the state has grazing planners. We have a grazing planner, Mike Gale, who works in Washington, Dodge, Ozaukee counties. So there's staff out here that are available to help farmers get grazing plans. So I just wanted to throw that out there for people that don't have a plan yet, but are, you know, looking forward to signing up. So with that, do we have other questions?
Not so much a question, Kirsten, but I just have a comment. And many farmers that I approach and suggest to about signing up for CSP, I hear that they feel the paperwork is a great barrier, and they don't really want to invest all the time into filing for an application. And to that, I just can say, just think about, you might have to invest 1 or 2 or 3 rainy days to file for your application, meet with the NRCS personnel, but you heard from some of the presenters the rewards that you get. That is an hourly wage that you cannot beat even with rotational grazing. So from that point of view, I would really encourage anybody, don't let the paperwork and the time investment be a barrier.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. And at some point here, maybe when we're done, Lisa can jump in. She's going to be sharing the application. So it's really just a 3-page application, the same application now that someone would fill out for an EQIP application. There's just a CSP box on that we check. And it's really a simple thing. I think the time comes down the road working with the NRCS district conservationists or the NRCS staff in your county to get the contract done. I think it's a lot less time than it was 10 years ago when these projects first came out. Do we have other questions?
I have a question for either Meridith or Adam or maybe someone else on the call. I currently have an EQIP contract that I still have a few practices to fulfill. Should I wait to sign up for CRP, or should I sign up now? If I'm part of EQIP, is my CRP or CSP contract going to be as robust?
Meredith, do you want to answer that, or should I?
I'll let you take it.
All right. I think the hard answer there, it really depends. So with CSP and EQIP, the one thing I would say is if you're into your EQIP contract and you have things set up and you're pretty much good to go, and this is the direction you're moving forward with that, then I would absolutely encourage you to apply for a CSP. However, if you've built your farm up and you're phasing into it and you're going to add that next 40, or you want to add 20 over here, or you're going to make some changes still with your EQIP contract, then I would advise you to hold off another year, get things in place, because CSP is kind of going to be the next 5 years, and you really want to kind of set yourself up so that way you're not going to make it overly complicated for yourself. That's what I've seen to be the most beneficial. So if you feel confident that you're where you're going to be and you want to take on some of those enhancements, then I would tell you to do it. But without knowing your operation or your specific site, I'm a little hesitant just to say one way or the other. Meridith, would you have anything to add to that?
Right. So I agree with what Adam is saying. The only thing when I was in a field office that I would kind of tell my producers is, you know, I'm not discouraging you from applying. Don't bite off more than you can chew. You know, if you're working on your the EQIP contracts can be, there's a lot in them sometimes, you know, and if you can get through that contract and then hop into a CSP one, you know, just know what you have time commitment to be able to manage. And I can't answer that question for every individual. One thing I do want to circle back around to is kind of something off of what Kirsten said, which was, you know, the idea of, you know, there are people out there in the state able to write these grazing plans. And I just want to make sure it's clear that if you're looking for cost sharing to write a grazing plan through EQIP, you need to be talking with that local service center ahead of time, because we can't have you starting to get that plan written before there's a contract in place. Okay, but if you are going with a different avenue where you're not looking for EQIP funding to write that plan, and there are those opportunities out there, it's a whole different ballgame. So once again, communication with your local field office staff, communication, you know, if you're working with Rachel or Kirsten to talk that through and make sure everyone's on the same page of what the expectations are going forward is very important.
I absolutely second that. The one thing, there's a lot of moving parts with both EQIP and CSP, and just making sure everyone starts off at the same level is super important. Otherwise, it gets complicated fast, and those are just unnecessary hurdles that you don't need to go through. So if you have a planner you want to work with, or if you've got an office that you're working with, the easiest way is a quick phone call, a quick Zoom meeting, or meeting in the field, maybe when things get back to normal. And that just starts everyone off from the same foot. And that means a lot.
Thank you. Does anybody have other questions?
There were a couple questions in chat.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing those. Lisa, are you?
I can see them. There's one regarding monitoring grazing, pasture stands, body condition scoring. Are there templates that can help with monitoring these things? There absolutely are. There are different body condition scoring sheets out there that you can work through. I don't think that we specifically say that you have to use one or the other with the enhancement. So choose the one that's going to be most applicable for you. The other thing too, from the monitoring standpoint, that's something that, you know, you can be taught, you can show you, you can document that in Excel. There's 1,000 different ways to do this. It really comes down to what you're comfortable with, but you do need to choose specific points. You do need to monitor that, and you just have to show what your plan is moving forward with that. And then there's another question: are grazing plans still good / current if you had one written for EQIP, but the contract wrapped up a couple of years ago? That was from Leslie. I'm going to butcher your last name. It's from Leslie. The grazing plan is valid as long as there have been no major changes to it. Now, that being said, if you're changing, like if you added 20 animals to it, or if you add another 20 acres, or your grazing went from 4 days to 2 days, those are all things that we would need to update in order to make it a current grazing plan. In addition to that plan, when you start thinking about that, that's where you can also start calling out some of these potential enhancements, or thinking about that, like isolating some of those sensitive areas out. So that way, if you've got a 20-acre field or a 10-acre field and it's got a low corner in the back, that could be fenced out with polywire, or it could be a permanent fence, and those could be grazed maybe half the amount of time in the summertime to really let that area not be impacted so much by cattle. Cows are some of the best and worst management tools we have. And with just a little forethought and common sense, it's amazing what they can do for us.
Adam, there are a couple of questions about silver pasture, whether that's a consideration as an enhancement in CSP.
Yep, so silvopasture is an enhancement for CSP, and it's something that Wisconsin is, I would say, jumping into a little bit more. It's also looking like we're going to be doing some of that with EQIP as well. But absolutely, we can plant trees into existing fields or along fence lines, or we can take old sites, old pastures, and we can renovate them and bring them up and add trees to those areas. So that is absolutely an enhancement that we can do. I just didn't choose that in this one. I just chose the big grazing ones. So I just want to be clear that there are so many more enhancements that you can look at or choose from for your operation. And I just had to cherry pick some of the best or the most used grazing ones for this presentation. It comes down to having a good conversation with your field office and working through the application / planning process.
Are we seeing anything else in the chat, or does anybody have more questions?
I'm going to throw in a couple of 2 cents worth on the stock photo that was used to show our farm shows that we're not perfect. The standing water right around the water supply. I think that's an open avenue to realize that no one is perfect, and it's a process of continual improvement. And I think that our experience with the CSP program, the couple of individuals that I mentioned and the others here are showing that we are all working together to try to improve the conservation practices. It was learning experience to see the enhancement opportunities and really invite more of the opportunity to improve the way we're managing our land.
Rick was absolutely right when he talked before. I just cannot stress enough that every single grazer should be considering CSP. This is really the optimum farming enterprise from an NRCS standpoint. And I'm biased. I grew up on a grazing farm. I love working with grazers. Everybody who's in the grazing community is fun and open and willing to share knowledge. But that being said, when you look at the true impacts of grazing from the big picture, from soil and water conservation, from carbon sequestration to just even cycling of nutrients and wildlife, like there is just such an opportunity with pasture and grasses. And I can't stress that enough. And that's why I love CSP, because it rewards people who are going down that direction. And that being said, I'm pro-agriculture. I'm not out here to say that other farming practices are good, better, and different. I think we're all on the same team, but I do feel like we should call out the star producers, and it's pretty hard for any of those other farms to compete with rotational grazing when you look at the big picture and the real scale that you can have on that. Every acre in grass is truly something for water quality or soil erosion.
I have a question in response to Adam and Meridith. So if grazers and grazing operations are the gold standard, are they also in that workload prioritization tool that you guys are using? Or how are farms being ranked for CSP applications?
So the workload prioritization tool is really setting it up for grazers where if you have that grazing plan and it is still active and being followed, you are floating to the top for the prioritization that way. When it comes to how we're ranking them out in statewide, we're looking at, the ranking is in the process of changing for this coming sign up, where we're looking at practices that are being implemented, you know, how many practices are willing to be implemented, what is the diversity of practices being implemented. So I would say that these grazing operations are being ranked equally with the crop applications. You know, we're not putting one above the other programmatically in the ranking, but in the screening tool, there is the avenue to allow these applications to screen at that high level. So I don't know if you have a follow-up to that, Rachel, or if that kind of answers what you're looking for.
That pretty much answered. I was just curious, yeah, if grazing versus large crop operations ranked the same or better.
I thank you, Meredith. If anybody incurs an issue across the state where, say, their field office says, I'm really too busy to work on that right now, is there any assistance that producers can get, or could they contact you, Meredith, or how would they address a scenario like that?
So producers are always able to reach out to me in situations like that. But, you know, these offices, these field staff do have a lot that they're working on. They have a lot that they're working on deadline to deadline. CSP is only one of our programs. So, you know, if they're saying that there's not time right now to look at something, you know, it doesn't mean that they don't want to. It just means give it a little time. You know, I don't think that it's outside the realm, though, to circle back around with them in a week, 2 weeks, a month, whatever that timeline may be, to make sure that you are on the list to get to. You know, try to set up a timeline with them of when they will be able to, because they do have many competing demands on them.
That would be another reason to have an application done as soon as possible. We prioritize applications by the date that we receive them to. So if you are interested in that, the sooner you get signed up, the sooner we'll get down to your particular operation.
And Lisa, can we send those to an email to everybody who's registered here after, I think Meredith shared those with us yesterday. Can we send those out to them?
You bet. Yeah, in the confirmation that was sent out this morning, folks got them, and we will send them out again in a follow-up. Sure.
Fantastic.
I
Do we have
also
more questions?
the worksheets for all the enhancements that I presented on. So I would like to make sure that everyone could get those sent out to them. This just shows what we look for and some of the checklists that we're following with that.
Fantastic. And so this was recorded. And I think that, you know, if you have a neighbor who wasn't able to join, or a friend or whatnot, business partner, you know, we'll share the link to the recording as well with everybody. So you can feel free to continue to share this with other people that you will benefit from it. So if we have no more questions.
Yeah, there's a question,
ahead.
Kirsten. It's in the chat box. Somebody's asking whether it could apply to a beginning grazier, or would the farm need to be up and running?
So I'll answer that. The reality is that it applies to everybody, but it's going to be way better for you to get everything in order. Like Meredith said before, if you've got so many moving cogs in your wheel, it's impossible to keep up with what you need from a contract management. The one thing that I talk to people about, whether it's with or CSP, is I say this not to scare you, but I do want you to understand that these are federal contracts. There are commitments on both ends, and we want everyone to be successful with that. So you really need to understand that there is a commitment from you. So my advice to a beginning grazer would be hold off a little bit, get your operation in order, and then come around back to it.
And I just want to piggyback off what Adam is saying. The CSP sign up is a competitive sign up. You know, we're having high demand of applications across the state. It's a competitive sign up. So, you know, they rank out all against each other, and we fund from the top. Because it's a competitive sign up, the more up and running your operation is, you know, you have it up and running, you have the kinks figured out, you have conservation in place. The conservation that's in place, then you're going to get more credit for, which should increase then the assessment of your operation, which should help you rank higher. Okay, so that's really where it's not that beginning grazer shouldn't apply. It's that certain things need to be in place in order for them to maximize their benefit or maximize their ranking within CSP. But of course, we do want beginning farmers to be applying. It's really if they think they're in a comfortable place to be applying. And that is a conversation that you can be having with your local field office staff. Is it time to maybe start looking at a CSP, or are there things maybe we should go into EQIP or just even a CTA and work on to get the operation ready to compete statewide in that sign up?
Yeah.
And I've got,
Oh,
oh,
go ahead.
I had a quick question. In terms of, I know we kind of covered this a little bit, but I'm a beginning farmer. This will be my first year having cattle on our recently renovated pasture. And I'm definitely interested in these enhancements and CSP, that sort of thing. Is this much like EQIP, where if I go ahead and even if I'm not signed up through CSP, I start keeping records and doing some of these practices? Will that help me in terms of my application to get into the program? And is it like EQIP where you won't fund the measures, like let's say if I put in trees for shade or in the silvopasture setup, that sort of thing, that I can't, once I've done that myself, I can't necessarily get that CSP funding? I guess if that's a clear question, just the.
Right. So I think I understand what you're saying. And in your instance, for example, you want to plant some trees on a certain area of your operation. If you plant the trees there before you have a CSP contract in place, we cannot go back and pay on those trees. That does not mean that you can't say, I want to plant trees elsewhere on the operation and we can't work together on that location. Does that make sense?
Yep.
But yeah, you do have to have the contract in place prior to starting the activities. Some of the things like rotational grazing, we have a rotational grazing standard. You're probably gonna, by the time you're applying for CSP, you're probably already meeting that standard. That means that through CSP, we are not going to pay you to do something you're already doing. But there are those enhancements that are going to ask you to go one step higher above what you're already doing, right? So that's where this does get a little bit tricky. And that's where communicating your goals and objectives with your local field office and what you'd like to do is really important, because every situation is a little bit different.
Meridith, that seems to be a little bit confusing, because I thought part of the CSP program is that you are getting rewarded for existing conservation practices on your farm, and the enhancements are just in addition to that.
And you're right in saying that. So you're getting paid, you're getting a lump sum payment every year that's taking into account everything you're already doing. But you have to do that additionality. You have to do something additional. And that something additional can't be something that's already in place.
Thank you.
Yep.
I would also like to add, because I know there's some newer farmers on this call, that please understand the difference between an NRCS application versus an NRCS contract. That has been problematic in the past. We have a lot of paperwork that we sign, but don't start anything until you have a signed contract.